Welcome to another episode of the Live Happy, Healthy, and Inspired podcast. The podcast all about learning how to live a happy, healthy, and inspired life. I'm your host, Brad, a once upon a time overweight, lethargic, low self-esteem couch potato that turned it all around. My mission now is to empower you, the listener, with the strategies, tips, and advice for what it takes so that you too can live happy, healthy, and inspired. What happens when your entire world shifts and one day you find yourself grappling with a diagnosis that seems to close every door? This episode is a powerful and inspiring story about Todd Arkyn Crush, a man who went from living in isolation deep within the woods, battling the voices and shadows of schizophrenia, to taking his life back step by step, starting with the simple act of walking to his mailbox. Over the years, Todd's baby steps became strides, and his strides turned into miles, until he was running ultramarathons and inspiring countless others with his resilience. In this episode, we dive into Todd's journey, uncovering themes like resilience against the odds, how you can go from surviving to thriving, the power of small steps, how small steps can be the start of taking back your life, mental strength and determination, lessons in pushing forward and keep going when all feels impossible, and breaking the stigma, Todd's commitment to empowering others with his story. Stay tuned to the end, where Todd shares his most important piece of advice for how you too can take back your life and defy the odds, creating a new and improved version of you.
Thanks again so much for being here, everyone. Another episode of the Live Happy, Healthy, and Inspired podcast. And from time to time, I like to run my series I call From Surviving to Thriving. And today I've got my guest with me, Todd Arkyn Crush, coming from my next door neighbor, literally over in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And the reason we were talking off camera a little bit, the reason I wanted to have you here is I like to inspire my listeners with, stories of overcoming the odds, defying the odds, overcoming not just adversity, but tremendous adversity, and proving that, where you are or where you were in life does not necessarily equate to what you can be and what you can accomplish and what you can do and all that. And you are a living, breathing example of all of that, Todd.
Thanks.
To get into your story here in just a second. But again, for those listening, Todd has an incredible story, and it really is about surviving to thriving and defying the odds, overcoming the odds. And this is how you can do it in your life. So, Todd, with that, I talked too much. I'm going to let you take it away. Why don't you start a little bit by sharing your story and your background?
Yeah, real brief. I grew up in Wisconsin and had an abusive mother that would verbally abuse me and also locked me in a closet for days on end.
Wow.
And it was very difficult and left me with a couple things, a very negative loop of thoughts in my head and some PTSD and trauma. And then when I was 25, I was healthy. I was running 100 miles a week and working a really good job, had a good career, and schizophrenia happened when I was 25 and struck me down. My life literally went from, relatively normal. I mean, I did have PTSD and everything else, but all of a sudden I was in panic mode all the time because I never knew what was going to happen at any given moment. And it was difficult because I was afraid I'd be locked up in an institution forever. So I hid it from everybody, and it didn't go well. I really went off the rails pretty fast. I didn't run anymore. I drank a lot and ended up living in the wilderness for 5 years, homeless before I ended up in Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Can you explain maybe just a little bit for our listeners, a little bit more about schizophrenia, what it is, and did it just like suddenly appear out of the blue one day? You just all of a sudden one day you had it?
Yeah, that basically was how it happened. I was refinishing a table in our dining room, and all of a sudden I saw this girl outside, a young girl of about 8 or 10 years old. And so I went out to see if she needed help. I was the only one home at the time, and she was talking, but there was no sound. And I thought that was kind of weird. So I went inside. This is, pre or very early cell phone stage. So I went in to get the house phone and call the police and, find out what was going on with this girl. And when I came back, she was gone. And then a day later, she appeared in the living room and all the doors were locked. And I knew then something was going on because nobody else could see her. It was a real traumatic thing for me to witness, literally losing my mind. And, the analogy I give to people because I talk to a lot of doctors who are trying to understand this now that I'm on the lucid side of this. Everybody has bizarre dreams, like where you're dreaming that there's, cars that have mouths that are singing songs while they're driving around. And the point is, while you're dreaming, you think that's totally normal. You accept it and it just happens every day. It's not until you wake up that you go, that was a really weird dream. Well, the same thing is when I have hallucinations, they fool me every time. And
I know what it's like to struggle with weight loss, lack motivation, and feel lost with no purpose. I've been there. This was me, overweight, unmotivated, and battling low self-esteem. But I took back my life, and now I'm here to help you do the same. My book, Take Back Your Life, is your guide to breaking through these challenges. It's time to reclaim your health, motivation, and self-worth. Readers are saying, a life-changing guide helped me find my purpose and the boost I needed to transform. Start your journey today. Let's take back your life together.
Every time. And I think it's real. I accept it just like you would your bizarre dream. It's not until maybe, and this time period has gotten a lot shorter and now gone away, but for a period there, it was up to upwards of 12 hours before my rational brain would kick in and I would realize that this was something that wasn't real, and come into that after your dream kind of phase where, I'm still hallucinating, but I realize what's actually going on.
And this just took over your life, I guess. You mentioned that you became homeless then. You lived in the wilderness for 5 years.
Yeah, I'm gonna skirt.
Spiraled down.
Yeah, it was very difficult to keep a job because at any given time there were, hallucinations while I was sitting at my desk and I wasn't telling anyone. So I had to pretend like they weren't there and not react when they were throwing things around the office while I was talking to someone. So I lost job after job and eventually just stopped going to work. And, by this time had separated from my wife because she, had enough. And, nobody really understood what was happening. And I had a suicide attempt in 2004 and ended up in group homes after that because I wasn't making any income, partially, but also because of the suicide attempt. And this is where I'm going to skirt around because it's a real pivotal point in my book. But I met another schizophrenic in the group home who ended up doing something pretty horrific. And that scared me because I thought, well, if I'm capable of the same thing, I need to get away from people altogether. And that's when I just headed out into the woods and lived out there for 5 years, mostly out west.
Like California or...
Well, I first winter was in Idaho, and then I was in Montana and Oregon and California, and then the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado.
Just curious, how did you survive 5 years in the wilderness? Are you a mountain man with like wilderness?
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I had somewhat of a photographic memory, so a lot of survival books and manuals and things, and just lived off the land, trapped, fished, ate wild plants, ate a lot of things that I don't want to ever eat again. That's something that I'm really careful of in these podcasts and in my book too, because certainly going to the hospital and getting help would have meant a much better choice than going out into the woods. I nearly died several times. And,
Because
you
of
know,
temperature or animals, wild animals, or
yeah, I encountered, bear, wolverine, wolves, all those kinds of things. I built shelters when I was in Idaho in the winter. That was really the only cold winter I had because I was a lot further south for the other four. But yeah, I had a near death experience. The probably the biggest one was I was in Death Valley for 2 weeks and got stung by a bark scorpion, and we had very low water and was going in and out of consciousness and really dehydrated and was pretty sure I was going to die.
wow. So let me just kind of review real quick for the listeners. So you grew up with an abusive mom. You said she verbally abused you, locked you in a closet. Uh,
Hmm.
were able to overcome that a little bit, but then in your early 20s, you developed this schizophrenia, which took over your life. So is it fair to say you're very much in survival mode at this point then?
Yeah, I mean, once the schizophrenia came on, everybody has had, a close call for a car accident or been in a car accident. And if you think of those few seconds or up to a minute after that event, your heart's racing, you're sweating, you can't breathe, you can't get a deep breath, that kind of feeling. I had that feeling all the time. Even if I was just sitting on the couch, something could happen that nobody else could see. And all of a sudden I was in that panic mode. So it was fight or flight for, the better part of 3 decades.
Oh, wow. So that's almost 30 years. I'm sorry, real quick, I meant to ask too. So the scorpion that stung you in Death Valley, how you were in and out of consciousness, how did you overcome that?
Well, I had read that most, especially insects, carry a natural antivenom to their poison. So the trick to getting it is you have to eat the creature raw. So I did that, and it was horrible. I tied a tourniquet above the sting. It was right on my bicep,
Oh,
and tied it up here. Tried to slow my heart rate as best I could. I was using a solar still to get water, which was about half a cup a day, which wasn't very much when you're throwing up and feverish. I drank my own urine to stay alive and just tried to keep my heart rate low and in the shade as best I could.
wow, wow. Okay. Now you're in Death Valley, obviously, um, not doing so well, I guess, for lack of a better.
Yeah.
How did what was the turning point you started to switch all this around and break free and break through all this? Because obviously now you're married, you're thriving, you're a published author, you're going on podcasts all over the place. You're in a much better place. So how did you go from that, where you were with schizophrenia and Death Valley to where you are now then?
Yeah, I was around the West a little bit longer after that, and then did something I don't recommend. I hiked the entire state of Kansas, which was horrible. But I ended up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and my psychosis was so severe when I got to Fort Smith, that's right on the border, that I couldn't remember my own name, which is a really terrifying experience. I couldn't remember my name or anything about my past. So, I was questioning myself as to why I was out there. Like, did I kill someone or what was going on? I had like no recollection. So once my memory came back, I was in and out of hospitals for quite some time. Eventually got on disability and got somewhat on my feet. Still struggled with relationships. Just keeping everybody at a distance, was not comfortable around people, I think largely due to my childhood. And then for whatever reason became agoraphobic, and anxiety was real prevalent for me. Once
Real quick, Todd, what's agoraphobic?
That means like afraid to leave your house,
Oh, okay, okay.
so, or apartment or whatever in my case. So I was in this apartment all by myself and afraid to leave, and was literally in that state for almost 2 years, and had my groceries delivered, left outside the door, and was real paranoid and anxious all the time. I would hallucinate people breaking into my apartment, and all kinds of other things. So um, in 2018, I decided to start fighting back. And the big catalyst for that was I stepped on the scale and I was 297 pounds.
Oh,
And I just flipped a switch and decided I am not going to get to 300. So I threw all my junk food away, and I would I was still afraid to leave my apartment. So I would set the timer on my oven for like 40 minutes, and I would like do laps around my apartment, just walking and jogging. Um, and then got to the point where I would, I would have to go out to get the mail on the sidewalk periodically, and I would set little goals to stay out there for, 5, 10 minutes. And when I failed at those goals, I would come in and write down the intrusive thoughts I had that made me come inside, like the woman in the window was calling the police. Well, when I came back in, I would calm down and write down that question and then say, or that thought, and then say, well, she was looking for her cat. And then the next time I attempted, I'd take that paper out with me, and it helped me rationalize my anxious and intrusive thoughts. So eventually that led to going around the block. I got vigilant about taking my medication. Very had a very structured routine with it. Like an alarm would go off and I had a big med thing, and I would take the next one. And then when the next alarm went off, I take the next one. Got really involved with working with my doctors at the best quality of life and medication management. I met my wife, and for the first time in my life, opened up to somebody and was vulnerable and shared everything. We were just friends at first, and it grew into something amazing, obviously. But that was important because when it was the first time in my whole life that I had ever opened up, but she is the type of person who doesn't just say, hey, you're doing a good job, but also points out, hey, you could have done a little bit better with that situation. So there was constructive and positive at the same time, and that really helped me grow. It was a little hard to hear given my verbally abusive childhood, but eventually I grew to really enjoy that kind of constructive criticism. The final, what's that?
I probably should ask you this earlier. Do you mind if I ask what kind of verbal? I was subject to a lot of verbal abuse too growing up. Do you mind if I ask what was some of the verbal abuse you were subjected to?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was um, mostly just real critical about everything I did, like you're doing this wrong, or you're not doing a good enough job with your schoolwork or everything else. And then the real big one was that you're going to be a failure. And I heard that like relentlessly. And
Yeah, mine
like
was similar. Mine was you're going to be a peon and I'm out to nothing. Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I was made to feel like a burden, and
yeah.
that everything was my fault. And that was coupled with a very stoic, kind of removed parenting style where you didn't talk about what you were feeling. You just went in your room and sat by yourself, and you weren't allowed to express emotions. So that combination made it very difficult for me to express myself and also not feel like a burden and like a failure. And ironically enough, the silver lining to that is what I'm doing now, given that talk of being a failure. Now, what I do when I go out and do these things, I try so hard, I practice so much, I train so much that it's impossible to fail because I'm driven by that, like to prove her wrong or something.
Mm.
Um,
Let me do a quick recap because there's some things about your story that are actually quite similar to mine, but I want to point out for listeners. For anyone listening, three key parts to what Todd has been saying to help, overcome and go from surviving to thriving, so to speak. One, you made a decision. You had that you, as you said, you stepped on the scale and you were 297 and didn't want to get to 300. So then and there, you made a decision. Anybody listening, your life changes overnight when you make a decision. That's the starting point catalyst. That's exactly what happened to me, Todd. I was 50 pounds overweight and I finally had to make that decision. So making a decision is where it starts. The second thing I want to point out from what you've been saying, Todd, for anyone listening, is you took baby steps, small steps. You didn't take one gigantic step. You took a lot of small baby steps, going out for 5 minutes, then coming back in, going out maybe for 10 minutes, going back in, working with your doctors. So I'm going to guess this didn't happen overnight. You didn't.
No.
Yeah, it was a cumulative process. So those small baby steps are really, really important. And you had also, Todd, I see in your story what I call, what's same in my story, but I call the secret weapon, the secret ingredient. You were very determined. Uh, and that's for anyone listening, you've got to have that determination. I call it, I call it now focused effort, commitment, consistency, determination to go from where you are to where you want to be, to go from surviving to thriving. And Todd, I've seen all of that in your story here. Let me ask you, Todd. So once you kind of were I think you said Fort Smith, you stepped on the scale, that began your process of transformation. How many years has it been, or how long did it take to kind of really break through all of this and schizophrenia and overcome all that? Was it like a year, 2 years, 5 years?
It was a couple. Like I said, in 2018 was when I began that journey. That led to walking, which led to running outside. And at first, I was just running around the block. We had moved up to Fayetteville by this point, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of journaling going on and a lot of just constant mental processing by myself, where I would start reacting with that negative thought loop to a situation, and then I would say mantras to myself like choose love, like either for myself or the other person or whatever it was. And I would just slowly, minute by minute, relentlessly change that from negative to positive, and that made a huge difference.
Changing the mindset,
Yeah. And when we got to Fayetteville, I was running more, and I was running just really around the block over and over again, because I was afraid that if something happened while I was out there, like a panic attack or hallucination, I'd be in trouble. I've been attacked by trees before. I've had, little fire people jumping all over me. I mean, it's pretty scary. And, like I said, I get fooled. So I'm probably going to end up in the hospital or worse if something like that happens. So I was just running around the block. And then one day, it was March 12th last year, I went out for a run, and I was literally like half a block away from my house. And this man showed up, running around, breaking windows, setting off car alarms, ringing doorbells and yelling. And it was pretty early in the morning. And I was in this panic mode, thinking this guy's somebody's going to call the police. And, I didn't know what to do. So that day versus every day previous, instead of hightailing it home and isolating with music or whatever, I just kept running, and I ran really hard and really far. And by the time I got done, he was gone. And that day showed me that running was the type of thing that could not just improve my mental health, but could get rid of my symptoms altogether. At least it did that day. It also gave me the courage and the belief that I was stronger than my disease. So after that day, I started running further and further from the house. And then, I had this goal to run a marathon by my birthday this year. And then I decided that I wanted to run an ultra, which is any distance longer than 26 miles, by my birthday this year, and settled on 52 kilometers, because I'm going to be 52, which is about 33 or 32 miles, something like that.
Yeah, I just
and
52.
yeah,
So I'm right there with you.
So I decided I was going to do that, and that required me to run further from home to not be relentlessly bored running around the block. But when I switched to the ultra side of training, my mileage went up to about 75 miles a week. And March 6th of this year, I woke up and my symptoms were completely gone. The hallucinations were a little hard to tell right away, because they were about once or twice a week at that point. But the thing I noticed the most was the anxiety was gone, and the worst case scenario thinking and the worry and all that was gone. And Sunday was 7 months, and I still have this complete clarity and freedom from all of that. And
Wow.
there's probably a lot that went into it. Writing my book, I processed a lot, sharing with my wife, and the running and the medication. I mean, it did it for me. I don't know if it'll work for everybody, but
Yeah.
it worked for me.
Are you cured then of schizophrenia, would you say?
I'm careful with the word cured. I mean, I'm more comfortable with remission or something along those lines. Um, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of doctors that are really curious, and I do work a lot. I mean, that's what I do now. I'm an advocate for mental health, and I talk to people all day long, hundreds of people, and I talk to a lot of veterans, and the military screening for mental illness is pretty tough, and they go in just fine, and they come back out with schizophrenia-like symptoms.
Mm.
So there is a pretty large documented body of work as far as schizophrenia being trauma-based, which I'm thinking is kind of what happened to me, given my childhood and everything else. So it's possible, but I'm more comfortable with remission.
Okay. Again, I just want to recap this. This is fascinating. So for those listening, make a decision to change. That's exactly what Todd did. Take small baby steps every day to, whatever that, next part of you is. Change the mindset, which you did a lot too, Todd. Add a healthy dose of determination. And then I like what you said earlier. You were out running one day, and then all of a sudden you have the belief that you were better than your disease, that you could overcome it. That belief factor is huge. So you kind of put all this in a bowl and mix it up, and then you get the new version of you, Todd. How would you say your life today is compared to, I don't know, 10 or when you were at your real low point 10, 15 years ago, living in the forest and all that?
No, I'll jump ahead even further. This time last year, what I'm doing now would have been impossible. Being on a video, I was paranoid of cameras.
Wow.
Running, I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, part of my training with this alter was I never really run through the night before, so I wanted to see how I would do that. Now, being out in the dark with schizophrenia was something I never did. So what I did was I got up, normal time in the morning, ran 4 miles, 6 miles, I think it was, and then mowed the lawn and stayed up and active and did my normal thing all day. And then at midnight, headed out, ran a marathon in the dark, and had just this really positive, empowering experience.
Wow.
And so things like that, and traveling to LA to speak to a large company, I did that a month and a half ago or so. And so real quick, I'm standing in the back of this room with all these people, and they're waiting for me to talk. And most people are a little afraid about talking in front of people, and I usually would have been just a nervous wreck, or wouldn't have done it at all. And they were having some technical issues because this was streaming out to all their other offices or whatever. And I said to Dan, the guy that was up there working with it, I said, "Is this going to be a while? Because I could go for a run." Everybody laughs, and then as they're laughing, I'm thinking, "Who am I now? Why like I'm so relaxed? I'm making jokes." So it's a completely different mindset, and I don't have that fight or flight anymore. And I'm using what happened to me, the negatives that happened to me, to be a positive for like thousands of people. And that is the best part of all this.
Now, what do you think? What have you learned most from your story and your journey?
I would have to say that, there is no impossible. That, what you think is impossible now will probably be a warm up down the road. And that's certainly been the biggest part of my journey. And the other part of it is that, and sometimes this is hard for people to hear, but there is no magic bullet. You got to do the work. You got to, when I wrote my book, it took me about a year. And as I wrote it, I was reliving every trauma word by word. And I'm the kind of person that when I decide to do something, I have trouble doing anything else, but I do that relentlessly until I'm finished. Probably makes me a good ultra runner, but I was, 8-10 hours a day for a year, just this self-imposed therapy session. But out of that, I got complete acceptance and forgiveness and processed my entire life. And an experience like that is a lot of work. You have to sit with all those ugly parts of yourself that you don't show the world, and not stuff food or alcohol or anything down in there to cover them up. You just got to get in there and look around and decide what to do with it. And an experience like that is incredibly rewarding, but also very difficult.
Yeah, I want to get to your book in just a second, but I want to ask kind of final question. You pretty much answered it already, but just for promotional purposes, I always like to say they talk about this. So, out of everything you said, what is like one take home piece of advice or something that you would tell our listeners, whether they have a mental illness or they know someone with a mental illness, or just to overcome the odds, or what's that take home advice you would give them?
I would say it goes with running and it goes with life, whether you're battling things with your mind or with someone in your life or with a really long run that you don't think you're going to finish. Our limit is where we think our mind tells us to stop, but what we're capable of is limitless. And I've certainly experienced that over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. And so real quick, Todd, we see it in the background there. Tell us about your book, From Beneath the Ice. I'm gonna get a copy and read it now. Yeah, it sounds incredible.
Yeah, it's a memoir, a story of my life. Up until right before I went symptom free. That's actually not in the book, but I think it's got a good ending. But yeah, it's goes into a lot greater detail of as to why I did what I did and what I was thinking when I did it, and things I would have done differently had I known that. And the greatest reward about this process for me with the book has been all the people that have come back and messaged me or emailed me or whatever it is and said, hey, your book really changed my life. Or I get a lot of caregivers that reach out and they say, the person I care for decided to get help finally. And I when I was writing it, I knew that if I had had a book like that when my schizophrenia first hit, I would have probably made different choices. And that was my hope for everybody that reads it.
Yeah. And the book is available on Amazon. I'll provide a link to that. I've got your shortened link too from your Facebook page.
Yeah.
Todd, is there anything else that you would like to say today? Share with our listeners that you haven't already said? You said some incredible stuff. This is
Yeah.
listen to this
I,
times.
yeah. I just keep going. And baby steps is in my book actually as part of my process. And failure is a part of every process. And it's not so much, what's important is not that you failed, but what you do afterwards with that. It's actually in my second book that's coming out sometime next year, which is something I call constructive criticism, or failing constructively. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that ability to use your failures to propel you to greater success was a key component. So, keep going. Don't get discouraged. And before long, you'll be doing what seemed impossible.
Yeah, very, very similar there to my early stage of my journey. Well, Todd, thank you very much for being here today and sharing your story and all that, and giving our listeners hope and inspiration that, yeah, truly anything is possible, even breaking through and overcoming a pretty neglected childhood and a severe mental illness issue. Thank you for sharing that. For
Absolutely.
You that have been listening, thank you for being here listening. If you've got anything out of this, please share this episode far and wide. The more we get people to listen to this, the better. And if you're up for it, please hit that subscribe button. And I would sure love it if you would leave me a review. Again, thanks for being here, everybody. And until next time, live happy, healthy, and inspired. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.